First things first, a little bit about me and how I'm going to explain some principles about how we're doing analytics. I'm Dominik. I just recently finished my bachelor's degree. I've been working for Alethio for not so long. I didn't have a background in blockchain stuff before that. I mainly focus on doing nice backend things and data analytics whenever it's necessary. Some background about Alethio. We're part of Consensus. We've been existing for a little more than a year by now, and we amassed in that time 23 members from China, Brazil, the US, Germany, and Romania. So we're fairly distributed, and what we do is just the basic everyday business is our business is extracting data from the Ethereum blockchain, piping it through an analysis pipeline, and then the way we actually make money to finance all our fun stuff is we provide dashboards to customers in different levels of complexity, so beginners, developers, DevOps, you name it. But this talk is going to be more it's going to be less about Alethio products, because I'm not a sales guy, I'm a dev guy. It's more going to be about complexity and awareness on how to deal with that kind of complexity. So for many users, the blockchain nowadays looks like this. And in that haystack, we have a plethora of data, and people are desperately trying to pull out relevant information for them from that haystack. And oftentimes they start to get frustrated with the complexity of pulling that data out. And even if they manage to put out relevant data to them, they're still being faced with the complexity of actually making sense of that data. So just to quickly revisit what the categories of data are that we have. So we have, for example, network data. So everything related to transaction pools and miner data, stuff outside of what we see in, for example, log events. So log entries, when a smart contract executes, basically give hints about normal operations, right? Whenever a developer wants to write to a log, they can do it, but if anything fails, we will rather see it in the transactions and contract messages or internal transactions as what is the name? Etherscan coined it. So we try to gather all this data. Basically, we have a pool of Geth and parity nodes running, and our basic principle is that wherever you can call a method to get data, we do it. We gather everything we can, and when we aggregate it, it kind of looks something like this. So this is our version of the haystack. And it's fairly easy to see that it becomes rather complex if you just mash it together. So this is where we're getting to work. And I wrote down some interesting questions that people might recognize as fairly complex if you just focus on raw data extraction, like just extracting events from an Ethereum client that you're running. So, for example, what can be considered a normal interaction with my dApp? What other dApps do my customers use? When I pay out certain rewards to my clients, what do they do with them? Are they being traded? Are they being reinvested? Is there some kind of organization, grouping among my clients? So it becomes rather obvious that to answer those questions, we mainly need two things. We need to add context to our smart contract interactions, and for each application that we're looking into, we need some kind of semantic understanding. We need to know what the dApp is actually doing to provide relevant insights. Of course, we can deal with normal metrics like transactions, like transactions coming in, or how many active users do I have. But in the context of each dApp specific to the application, there's so many more interesting things to look at, which the basis of these metrics, is still extracting raw data. But we're focusing on making sense of that. So if we look at Etherscan, for example, we might get event data like this. So this is a CryptoKitties birth. We have the parameters. We can decode them. And when we do that decoding, we might end up with something like this. And so this is the line where most people's analytics end. So they have this table, they can visualize it. But what about the actual semantics of a CryptoKitties birth? So if we add semantics, we might end up with something like this. So this is a CryptoKitties birth graph, right? An arrow from a CryptoKitty to another means that the CryptoKitty on the one end of the arrow is either a matron or a sire, so either a father or a mother participating in the birth, and the CryptoKitty where the arrows are pointing at is the newly born kitty. Right? So building that graph is not really hard. It's easy to do when you extract the events. But what about the semantics? So a nice example would, for example, be on this graph, we can do incest detection. So first degree incest in CryptoKitties is not possible, as it turns out, but second, third, fourth degree incest obviously is possible. And what we could do with this semantic understanding is come up with a metric of how incestuous the CryptoKitties universe actually is, because it's a giant orgy, basically. This is a rather fun example. We're also gonna come up with a nice article with that, with more detailed incest analytics. But if we stay serious, there's lots of nicer advanced use cases. So the power of doing this, what is called semantic lifting, of lifting raw data onto a semantic level, is that we're not bound to any protocols anymore. So in an example of decentralized exchanges, we have a plethora of protocols and approaches. We have 0x protocol, we have Kyber, we have Bancor, we have AirSwap, and all of them work in different ways. But if we lift this data onto a semantic level, it's always kind of the same. We have orders, they are being filled, we have maker and taker tokens, we have the amounts, we have fees. So they're all the same on the semantic level. And when we actually went ahead and did that, because DEXs are a large trend that is to be reckoned with, and we came up with a nice database actually doing live analysis. And now currently we're monitoring 8 to 12 DEXs. We're still trying to figure out the nitty-gritty details of everything. But we can have a unified table of all DEX queries happening on the Ethereum blockchain. So with this, this might be a little hard to see, but when we do analytics on this, it's fairly easy to recognize high-level trends. And if we pipe it into some neat visualizations, we can actually see, we can make sense of DEX trends as a whole, generalized on the whole Ethereum blockchain. So for example, we can easily see, do we have a laser pointer? Yeah. We can easily see that IDEX is a major player, but we can also see 0x growth, for example. We can see the distinct amount of tokens that are being traded. We can see all the amounts of trades that we've gotten. So this is over the course of 10 days, from July 3rd to July 13. July 3rd is when we took it online, but it's still running. The table is still filling. So the true power here is accessibility, right? So depending on whether you're a developer or a complete newbie trying to make sense of certain trends, you don't really want to deal with this, right? Because parsing the events, dealing with finality problems and reorgs, and running your own clients, and then the client instance hangs. We already dealt with all of those problems, and instead of this, we can actually provide this. So we just lift the raw data on a semantic level, and when we have certain addresses participating in simple trades, like ETH transfers, we can easily semantically group them and say, okay, Alice owns this pair of addresses, Bob owns the other pair. And then what we can actually do is semantically express Alice trades with Bob. We don't have the raw transactions anymore that we have to make sense of, but we can just say, we can just express this in a triple: subject, predicate, object, Alice trades with Bob. And now we can do simple queries saying, is Alice trading with Bob? Or what is the volume Alice is trading with Bob? And when we have this kind of data representation, it's trivial to correlate certain activities, visualize them in a nice way. As you can see in our booth at the consensus stand, we have like a little visualization of blocks on the Ethereum blockchain as they come in, and you can play around with it a little, so you might want to check that out. With that grouping, however, also, it's fairly easy to not group by users, but group by dApps that leverage multiple smart contracts. And suddenly, when you can access that group and say, what is the amount of internal transactions one smart contract sent to another, or how many events have been triggered, it's fairly easy now. You don't have to take into account all smart contracts in your ecosystem. You just query by your dApp name. Now, I said the word semantics a lot, but what has been missing so far in the examples is actual context about our users or how dApps interact with each other. So when we look at raw event data, we can obviously see direct interactions. But this is not all that is happening. We might miss out on interesting activity, right? So I'm sure most of you guys heard about the Bancor security incident and funds being stolen. Now, the interesting question would be, where do those things go? Obviously, you can look at the transaction on Etherscan and you can try to click through it, but it's fairly easy to distribute the stolen funds in a way through washing accounts and doing money laundering that with simple Etherscan transaction clicking, you just won't be able to follow it anymore. Of course, you can sit down with your calculator and type in all the transaction volumes and try to see where it's going, whether it ends up at an exchange. But you don't really have to invest that work when you work on a semantically lifted level anymore. And that last question, what happens to Ether during and after ICOs, when people invested, that bugged me personally a little, because I'm sure all of you guys heard about this weird little project called EOS. And EOS, the EOS crowd sale contract, is transferring all Ether it gets to the EOS owner contract. And from there, it's kind of weird because the ICO is still running, but Ether is being transferred out. And I asked myself, okay, where does it go? And there's actually little use cases for this visualization, but here it's spot on. It's called a Sankey diagram. So we can actually see the sale contract. So we have all the contributors of the ICO, we have the sale contract, and we see one-to-one all Ether is going out to the EOS owner contract. And from there, it gets kind of fishy. And as I said, if you try to do this manually, Jesus, it would be too much work. What if we zoom in here a little? We can actually see that after some account fuckery, ETH is being traded at Bitfinex or other exchanges. Further back, we also have Kraken and Poloniex. So this is kind of weird. But the whole point is, we actually do not do forensics. It's more about community empowerment and fun. We do this because we really enjoy it. But the basic principle is, we can provide analytics, we can hit up people with data, and from there, you guys, the community, can make educated decisions, make the ecosystem a little more robust, and further the whole cause of the Ethereum blockchain. So there's some other stuff that really interests us. I'm personally, with my security background, I have a strong interest in post-attack analytics. We do anti-money laundering, we detect anomalies on a semantic level, and we have a live pipeline where you can just submit a query, and then as blocks come in, you get live analytics for it. And my boss told me to add a little personal touch, and I'm a real fan of CryptoKitties, actually. So we also do some more analytics on CryptoKitties. But to spread a little more awareness about semantic analytics, we have to do this even more. We have the principles boiled down right now. It's all fairly stable. But as a little call to action, we're always looking for new, cool, interesting stuff, for new, interesting ideas. Not necessarily to sell them as a product, but just to have fun and to give something to the community. It's all about opening up the data that we have and using it to empower people so they can make educated decisions.